She leaned close and whispered, "Say hi to the sharks," right before giving me a gentle shove off the yacht. My son, Michael, just stood there with a smile. Their plan was simple: take my $3 billion fortune. If you're listening, make sure to follow along and tell me where you're from. But when they came back home later that night, they found me sitting in my favorite armchair, waiting with a little surprise just for them. Let me back up and explain how an ordinary Tuesday morning turned into me crashing into the Atlantic Ocean. Maybe I should have seen the warning signs, but at 67, I still wanted to believe family actually mattered, that blood was thicker than seawater. That morning had started out lovely. Michael had called me himself, not through his assistant, which should have been my first red flag, and invited me on what he called a celebration cruise on his brand new yacht. "Mom, we want to toast your recovery from surgery," he'd said, his voice warm in a way I mistook for genuine love. Just the three of us, like a real family. I'd been 6 weeks into recovering from hip replacement surgery, and truthfully, I was desperate for any proof that my son and his wife, Emily, still wanted me around after my husband, Charles, passed away 2 years ago. He'd left me with his tech empire fortune, and ever since then, things between us had felt distant, colder. So I dressed carefully that morning, pulling on the navy dress Charles always said made my eyes shine, and took a taxi to the marina. The yacht was dazzling, a white beauty that probably cost more than most people's houses. Michael hugged me at the dock, the kind of hug that felt rehearsed, while Emily watched from the deck with a smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Isn't she gorgeous?" Michael asked, gesturing at the boat. 42 feet of pure luxury. "We're planning to take her down to the Florida Keys next month." What he didn't mention was that they'd bought the yacht with the $3 million I'd given them last year to invest in his so-called consulting firm. Money I was starting to doubt had ever touched a real business account. The first hour passed pleasantly enough. We cruised into calm waters, the main shoreline fading in the distance. Emily served mimosas and chatted about their plans to renovate the house. My old house, the one I had signed over to them after Charles died because I thought moving into a condo would be easier. But then Michael began slipping questions into the conversation, casual at first, about my will, about the trust, about whether I'd thought about simplifying things. "It's just that probate can be such a nightmare, Mom," he said, filling my champagne glass a little too eagerly. "We just want to be sure everything's in order." That's when I noticed Emily with her phone, pretending to take selfies but angling the camera to catch me on video. She was filming me drinking, talking about money, building some kind of staged evidence. Suddenly, it all made sense. The way they'd handled my hospital paperwork after surgery. The temporary power of attorney papers they'd insisted I sign. The financial advisor who had suddenly stopped taking my calls. "Michael," I said, setting down my glass carefully, "I want to go back to shore now." That's when the mask slipped. "I'm afraid that's not going to happen, Mom," he said, his voice colder, sharper. "We need to talk about your health. About your memory." "My memory?" I snapped. I was sharper than both of them put together. "You've been showing signs of dementia," Emily said smoothly, stepping closer. "We've documented everything. The doctors agree you can't handle your own finances anymore." It was absurd. But even as I argued, I realized just how carefully they had set the stage. The boat was miles from shore. No one else in sight. Just us, the ocean, and their plan to strip me of everything, or worse. "Mom, we're only trying to help you," Michael insisted, but his eyes were ice. "We can do this the easy way, or the hard way." I pushed myself up, my hip aching but my mind clear as day. "And if I refuse?" That's when Emily's smile finally turned real. Well, an elderly woman, fresh out of surgery, probably on too many pain meds, she got confused on the boat. She shrugged. "Accidents happen." I had raised this man from diapers, taught him to ride a bike, paid for his college, his wedding, his house. And now he stood there nodding while his wife plotted my death. "You're both insane if you think you'll get away with this," I told them. "Actually, Mom, we've thought it through," Michael replied, pulling a folder from his bag. "Your signature here transfers everything over for your protection, and we all go home happy." I glanced at the papers, then at my son's expectant face, then at Emily's phone, still recording. And finally, at the endless ocean, less terrifying than the two people who should have loved me most. "Go to hell," I said. And that's when Emily stepped behind me, leaned in close, and whispered those words about sharks, right before giving me that quiet, final push. They were too clever to make a big scene. Just one quick shove while I was leaning over the rail, staring at the water. And suddenly I was in the ocean, navy dress and all. As I went under, I heard Michael shout, "Mom! Oh my God, Mom!" But underneath that, I caught Emily's voice, low and steady, talking on the phone. "Yes, we'll need you to file the emergency petition Monday morning. She's clearly not competent." Then the water swallowed me whole, and survival became my only concern. I've always been a strong swimmer. Charles and I used to swim laps every morning together. But the icy shock hit me hard, and the weight of my dress dragged me down. I kicked off my shoes, fought my way up, and broke the surface just in time to see the yacht pulling away. They were really leaving me to die out there. That's when I spotted the fishing boat. Its captain, Jack Reynolds, was exactly the kind of man who'd risk himself to save a drowning grandmother. He was in his early 60s, weathered from a lifetime on the ocean, with a moral compass my own family seemed to have lost. "Holy hell, lady, what happened to you?" he asked as he and his teenage grandson hauled me aboard. I was shaking so badly my teeth rattled. Jack wrapped me in a blanket that smelled of salt and diesel, while his grandson, Ethan, started the engine. My family," I managed between gasps. "The yacht. We saw them," Jack said grimly. "Took off like a bat out of hell. Didn't even glance back. What kind of people do that?" "The kind who inherit $3 billion if I'm not around to stop them," I thought. Out loud I said, "The kind who aren't really family." Jack grabbed the radio. "Coast Guard, this is the Silver Bell. We've got a woman we pulled from the water about 12 miles southeast of Newport. She's conscious, but she needs medical attention." "Wait," I said, clutching his arm. "Please, don't tell them you found me. Not yet." He studied my face with those sharp seaman's eyes, the kind that can tell when someone's running from more than just waves. "You in some kind of trouble?" "Yes. But not what you think. I need to get to shore without anyone knowing I survived." "Can you help me?" Ethan looked nervous. "Grandpa, shouldn't we?" "Should and shouldn't, that's a slippery slope," Jack said slowly. "Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't look much like following rules." He keyed the radio again. "Coast Guard, disregard that. False alarm, just debris in the water. All clear." We slipped quietly toward a small private dock Jack knew. On the way, I told him everything, about Michael and Emily, the money, the documents. Jack listened without a word, his face growing darker with every detail. "So they'd rather be rich orphans than broke kids with a living mother," he muttered at the end. "So what's your plan?" That was the question. What was I going to do? To them, I was officially dead. They'd go back, report me missing, cry to the authorities, and get those legal papers rolling. But here's the thing about being dead, you suddenly have choices you didn't have alive. "I'm going to let them think they won," I said, surprised at how steady I sounded. "And then I'm going to destroy them." Jack grinned for the first time since pulling me out of the water. "Now that's a plan worth helping with." Ethan dropped us at a tiny dock tucked in a quiet cove. Jack knew a woman who ran a no-questions-asked bed and breakfast. Mrs. Ramirez, tough as nails in her 70s, barely blinked when Jack explained I needed a place to stay off the books. She set soup on the stove before I'd even finished toweling off. "Honey, I've seen people hiding from all kinds of storms these last 30 years, she said. "As long as you're not bringing violence to my door, you're welcome." That night, while Michael and Emily were probably filing police reports about their poor missing mother, I sat in Mrs. Ramirez's kitchen in borrowed clothes, plotting their downfall. Jack agreed to be my eyes and ears. His charter boat kept him close to the marina, where he could keep track of their movements and maybe do some quiet digging. "There's something I don't get," I told him, sipping my third coffee. "Even if I had died accidentally, there'd be procedures. Investigations. How were they planning to make this legal?" "That's what bothers me too," Jack said. "They've gotta have help. Somebody feeding them information. Somebody inside." That night, I wrote a list of everyone who'd touched my finances since Charles died. My lawyer, my accountant, my advisor, the bank managers, the trust officers. Someone on that list was helping them. And I was going to find out who. But first, I needed to know what story they were telling. Mrs. Ramirez had an old computer, and I spent hours scrolling through news articles. Headlines spoke of the tragic boating accident that claimed the life of prominent businessman Charles Whitman's widow. The articles painted me as an old woman slipping into dementia. Michael was quoted at length, describing my confusion and memory lapses. Emily had apparently sobbed to reporters about their fears for my safety. They even provided a photo, me at Michael's birthday last year, looking dazed as I held a drink. I remembered that moment. It was a surprise party, and no one had told me. I'd walked in expecting a quiet dinner, only to find 20 strangers in my former home. But in that picture I just looked lost. Exactly the image they wanted. My obituary was already online. Margaret Whitman, beloved mother and grandmother, passed away in a tragic boating accident while enjoying an outing with her devoted family. In lieu of flowers, the family requests donations to the Alzheimer's Association. Even in death, they were still pushing the story of my supposed decline. Bastards, I muttered, slamming the laptop shut. Mrs. Ramirez looked up from her knitting. Planning something special for them? Oh yes, I said softly. Something very special indeed. The funeral was crowded, far more than I expected for a woman supposedly slipping into dementia. I watched from behind a maintenance shed at the cemetery, binoculars pressed to my eyes, while Jack kept lookout. Michael had spared no expense. The casket was premium, expensive, polished, and of course, empty. Flowers everywhere, and glossy programs with my picture right on the front. Michael and Emily stood at the graveside in perfectly coordinated black, taking condolences from friends, business partners, even people I barely recognized. What shocked me most was how many of the mourners were genuinely grieving. My neighbor Helen was crying openly. My book club friends showed up. Even Dr. Walker, the surgeon who'd replaced my hip, looked truly somber. These people cared about me. And yet, Michael and Emily were standing there, soaking up sympathy, fully aware I was alive. See anything worth noting? Jack whispered, crouching beside me. Besides my son giving the performance of a lifetime? Yeah. Look at who's not here. Jack adjusted his binoculars. Like who? My financial advisor, Gregory Price. My lawyer, Linda Monroe. My accountant, Anthony Diaz. Funny how the people who should be at the funeral of a client worth $3 billion are suddenly absent. Maybe they were busy handling estate matters. Or maybe, just maybe, they couldn't look anyone in the eye while being part of this scheme. After the service, I watched Michael and Emily work the crowd like seasoned politicians. Smiles, handshakes, hugs. But the moment someone asked for specifics about my final days, they moved that person along quickly. That afternoon, Jack drove me back to Mrs. Ramirez's place in his old pickup, taking back roads just in case. I'd been dead on paper for 4 days now, and I was beginning to realize the strange advantages that came with that. I need to get inside my old house, I told him as we pulled into the driveway. That's dangerous. Aren't they staying there now? Not according to property records, I said, pulling out my notes. They kept their own place. My house has been empty since I moved to the condo last year. But here's the weird part, someone's still paying the utilities. Electric, water, heat. And everything's being maintained. Why keep it running if nobody's living there? Jack frowned. Good question. I think it's time I find out. That night, he dropped me 3 blocks from my former home in Georgetown. The house where I'd lived with Charles for 35 years, raised Michael, hosted every Thanksgiving, Christmas, and more dinner parties than I could count. The house I'd signed over to my son, believing family actually meant something. It was past midnight, the street quiet except for the occasional car. I still had my key. Michael had never thought to ask for it back. I slipped around to the back door, feeling like a burglar breaking into my own home. Inside, everything felt off. Not empty exactly, but wrong. I moved through the rooms with the small flashlight Jack had given me, staying low near the walls so I wouldn't be seen through the windows. The living room furniture was covered with sheets, but new expensive pieces had been added. A leather sofa that probably cost more than most people's cars. A sleek entertainment center that definitely hadn't been there before. The kitchen fridge wasn't stocked with basics for the occasional visit, it was full of fresh, pricey food. Imported cheeses, organic vegetables, gourmet items that only made sense if someone was there regularly. But it was in the home office, Charles's old study, that I found what I was really looking for. The desk was piled with paperwork, legal documents, financial statements, and worst of all, a binder labeled with 2 words that made my stomach turn, the Margaret Project. My name turned into code for my elimination. I photographed everything with the disposable camera Jack had given me, my hands trembling as I flipped page after page. They'd been planning this for over a year, setting me up, step by step. Doctor visits where they coached me to act confused. Social situations staged to make me look disoriented. That photo from the birthday party? They deliberately left me in the dark so my shock would look like senility. Even the medication mix-up 3 months ago, the one that sent me to the ER? They had switched my pill bottles. Every single slip had been carefully engineered, documented as signs of dementia. The most chilling piece of evidence was a letter from someone signing only as MT. The timeline needs to move faster. Margaret is asking too many questions about the power of attorney. If she sees a lawyer, this falls apart. Phase 3 must begin within 2 weeks. And Phase 3, according to their chart, was my death. I had just finished photographing the last page when I heard a car door slam outside. Headlights swept across the curtains, and then voices floated in through the front door. Michael and Emily, home from their grief performance. My heart pounded as I gathered my things and slipped toward the back, their laughter and footsteps already inside. "Think Dr. Walker bought it?" Michael asked, his voice low. She was crying too hard to think straight. Besides, what's she gonna investigate? Mom fell off a boat. Happens all the time. And the will? Emily pressed. Probate opens Monday. MT says we'll have full access to her accounts in 6 weeks. I slipped out the back door, heart pounding, creeping along the garden toward the street. That's when I froze. A baby crying. There was a baby inside my old house. Michael and Emily had never once mentioned having a child, which meant there was a bigger story here than I'd realized. As I crouched behind the rose bushes I'd planted 20 years ago, listening to the faint wails of an infant inside what used to be my home, it hit me. This wasn't just about money. This was about something much bigger. Jack picked me up at the corner 15 minutes later. I was still trembling as I climbed into his truck. "You look like you saw a ghost," he said. "Worse," I muttered. "I saw my replacement." I told him everything. The crying baby, the forged papers, the mysterious MT pulling strings behind the scenes. Jack frowned. "A baby?" "They never mentioned kids. Michael always said he and Emily weren't ready. Said they were too focused on their careers." I pulled out my disposable camera. I need to get these developed, but not anywhere they might have connections. Jack nodded. "I know a guy in Newport. Runs a 1-hour photo lab. Doesn't ask questions." While we waited for the prince, we sat in his truck outside a gas station, sipping bad coffee and trying to piece things together. "So they've been planning this for over a year," Jack said, scanning my notes. "Making you look incompetent, building evidence, getting someone on the inside to help. And now there's a baby. Either they lied about having kids, or the baby isn't theirs," I finished quietly. Jack turned to me, uneasy. "You think they stole a baby?" "I think they did something," I said flatly. "And I think MT is the key to figuring out what." When the photos came back, the evidence was devastating. Timelines, fake medical reports, financial projections, all of it laid out in black and white. But one picture chilled me to the bone, a birth certificate tucked under a stack of papers. Baby Whitman, born 3 weeks ago. Mother, Emily Whitman. Father, Michael Whitman. But 4 days earlier, on that yacht, Emily hadn't looked like a woman recovering from childbirth. "This certificate is fake," I told Jack. "Completely fabricated. So whose baby is it?" That night, I lay awake in Mrs. Ramirez's guest room, staring at the ceiling. My son and daughter-in-law had spent more than a year staging my downfall, forging documents, planning my murder. And now they had a baby they were hiding from the world. By morning, I'd made up my mind. Over breakfast I told Jack, "I'm going back. Not to the house. I'm going to follow them." "That's dangerous as hell," Jack warned. "They won't see me," I said. "As far as they know, I'm fish food." I spread out a local map on Mrs. Ramirez's table. They can't just keep a baby locked inside all day. They'll need daycare, a sitter, something. Babies don't vanish for 8 hours while their parents play grieving family. Jack studied the map, doubtful. And what do you expect to find? The truth about that baby. And maybe the identity of MT. Mrs. Ramirez, who'd been quiet at the sink, finally turned. I know someone. A private investigator in town. Owes me a favor. Professional. Discreet. The best at following people without being noticed. I can't involve anyone else, I protested. Honey, she said firmly, drying her hands. You're past the point of handling this alone. They tried to kill you. If they realize you're alive, they won't hesitate to try again. She was right. But bringing in an investigator meant more people knowing my secret, that I wasn't actually dead. What kind of favor does he owe you? I asked. Mrs. Ramirez smiled. The kind where my grandson avoided jail for something stupid he did at 22. His name's Danny Crawford. Former cop. Reliable. Very good at making problems disappear. By noon I was in Danny's small office above a sandwich shop in downtown Newport, telling my story for the third time in a week. Danny was about 50, prematurely gray, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. So, he said after listening, you want me to tail your son and his wife, dig into this mysterious baby, and figure out who MT is? That's right. And you're paying me how? Because the papers say your accounts are all frozen. I slid an envelope across the desk. Cash. Emergency funds Charles had insisted we keep hidden in a safe deposit box. Danny counted, enough for 2 weeks of surveillance, and nodded. I'll need photos of them, addresses, anything you've got. I handed him everything, including the shots from my break-in. He studied them carefully, pausing on the one signed MT. This handwriting, he murmured, pulling a magnifying glass. Professional. But distinctive. I've seen something like this before. Mind if I run it through some databases? Do whatever you need. One more thing, he said as I stood to leave. If these two are as dangerous as you say, we set up a safety protocol. You check in every 12 hours. If you miss, I go straight to the police. I agreed, though I prayed it wouldn't come to that. The fewer officials involved, the better, at least until I understood exactly what Michael and Emily had done. That afternoon, I returned to Mrs. Ramirez's and waited. For the first time since this nightmare began, I had real help. And within 24 hours, Danny Crawford was already proving worth every penny. By the end of the second day, he had uncovered more about Michael and Emily than I'd learned in years of living with them. Your son's been busy since you supposedly died, Danny said, spreading photographs across Mrs. Ramirez's kitchen table. Multiple meetings with lawyers, 2 trips to the bank, and 3 separate visits to a private medical facility just outside Boston. Medical facility? I asked. Whitmore Reproductive Services, Danny explained. Exclusive, expensive, and very discreet. He tapped a photo of Michael and Emily walking into a sleek glass building. They specialize in surrogacy arrangements for wealthy clients who want total privacy. The pieces snapped together, and my stomach turned. They bought a baby. Looks that way. Not just any baby, either. They requested a newborn who could pass as their biological child. My contact at Whitmore says the arrangements were made 8 months ago. Paid in cash. Birth certificate pre-prepared. Mrs. Ramirez set down 3 steaming mugs of coffee and pulled up a chair. So they planned your death, bought a baby to inherit your fortune, and had someone on the inside feeding them information. About that, Danny said, sliding over another photo. I think we found MT. The picture showed a woman in her 40s with short auburn hair, an expensive briefcase in hand, shaking Michael's hand outside a downtown law office. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Miranda Parker, Danny said. Partner at Morrison & Parker Associates. They handle estate planning for some of Boston's wealthiest families. Parker. I repeated. Wait, Anthony Parker is my accountant. Are they related? Husband and wife, Danny confirmed. And here's where it gets ugly. Miranda's been quietly building a practice around what she calls family transition planning. Basically, she identifies wealthy elderly people with strained family ties, then helps the relatives accelerate their inheritance. I stared at the photo as recognition hit. I met her 6 months ago at some charity gala Michael dragged me to. She wouldn't stop asking about my estate planning. I'm not surprised, Danny said. Because Miranda has a business model. She targets the elderly, builds a narrative of dementia or incompetence, and creates legal cover so families can seize control of assets early. She's done it at least 6 times in the past 3 years. You mean murder, Mrs. Ramirez said flatly. Let's just say, Danny replied, when the elderly client resists, accidents happen. Falls, overdoses, boating mishaps. Always tragic. Always plausible. Always profitable. I felt sick. This wasn't just about my money. It was an entire operation preying on vulnerable seniors. How many has she killed? I whispered. Proved? None. Suspected? At least a dozen in the last 5 years. She's smart, and she only works with families who can provide cover stories. We have to stop her, I said. And we will, Danny promised. But first, you need to see this. He pulled out a folder. Michael and Emily filed preliminary probate documents yesterday. They're claiming you died intestate, with no valid will, which would make them your sole heirs. They're also arguing that any prior wills are invalid because you signed them while mentally incompetent. But I have a will, I said sharply. I updated it 2 years ago. I know, Danny said, sliding a paper across the table. I found it. It looked like my will. My signature was there. But the text was nothing I remembered. Everything left to Michael, with provisions for any future children, including the baby they had just acquired. They replaced it, I whispered. I walked to the window, staring at the ocean. A week ago, I was a widow just trying to stay connected with her only family. Now, I was a murder victim who had lived to uncover a criminal enterprise that included my own son. There's something else, Danny said softly. About the baby. I turned back. The birth mother was a 17-year-old named Sarah Miller. She ran away from Maine. No family, no support system. Miranda found her at a shelter in Portland. Offered her $50,000 to carry a child for a loving couple. My throat tightened. Where is she now? Danny's expression darkened. According to the records, she died from delivery complications. But I spoke to a nurse at Whitmore. She remembers Sarah. Healthy, no risk factors. Normal pregnancy, until the day she gave birth. They killed her, I said. Danny nodded grimly. I think so. But proving it? That's harder. What I can prove is that your son and daughter-in-law are working with a criminal operation that kills elderly people for money. And tomorrow at 10, they're meeting Miranda Parker to finalize the transfer of your assets. I sat back down, staring at the photos. My son, smiling, shaking hands with a woman who might as well have been a professional killer. Then I guess it's time for Margaret Whitman to rise from the dead. The hardest part about coming back isn't the shock, it's deciding who gets to see the ghost first. I could confront Michael and Emily privately, but they didn't deserve explanations. I could go public, let the world discover me alive. Instead, I chose something different. Strategic haunting, I told Danny. You want to what? He asked. I want them to know I'm alive, but not how much I know. I want them rattled, paranoid, making mistakes. Mrs. Ramirez smiled faintly. Psychological warfare. I like it. The plan was simple, but effective. While Michael, Emily, and Miranda sat in their meeting, neatly dividing my fortune, I'd be making my presence known, subtly, unmistakably, and just enough to scare them out of their perfect little script. Danny had tracked down where they were hiding the baby. During the day, he stayed at Michael's house with a private nurse hired through one of Miranda Parker's shell companies. The nurse, a woman named Carol Walker, had no clue she was caring for a baby that had been bought at the cost of its teenage mother's life. Carol's a good person, Danny assured me after running her background. Single mom, nursing degree, clean record. She probably thinks she's helping a real family with childcare. Then she deserves to know the truth, I said. That morning, while Michael and Emily were downtown legally erasing me from existence, I rang the bell at my old front porch. Carol was younger than I expected, mid-30s, tired eyes but genuine warmth. She opened the door with a baby bottle in one hand, her scrubs dotted with cartoon animals. Can I help you? She asked. Hello, Carol. My name is Margaret Whitman. I believe you're caring for my grandson. Her face drained of color. She knew the name, everyone did. The wealthy widow who had died in a tragic boating accident. "You're dead," she whispered. "Yes, I've been reading that too." "Fascinating story," I said with a gentle smile. "Not entirely accurate, though." "May I come in? We need to talk." She stepped aside, still staring like she'd seen a ghost. "But you died. Your son said." "My son said a lot of things. Not all of them true." I walked into my old living room, now full of glossy new baby furniture, and there he was. A perfect, tiny infant, maybe 3 weeks old, dark hair, wide brown eyes. My breath caught. "Oh, you beautiful thing. What's his name?" I asked softly, sitting beside the bouncy seat. "Baby Whitman," Carol answered automatically, then flushed. "I mean, they said they might name him Charles Jr., after his grandfather. But they haven't decided." "They haven't decided," I said quietly, "because he isn't really theirs." Carol sank onto the sofa. "I don't understand. You're supposed to be dead. Michael and Emily told me that they were grieving parents, that they needed help while they dealt with family matters." I cut in. "Carol, listen to me carefully. This baby is not their biological child. They purchased him through an illegal surrogacy that ended with the death of his birth mother. And just 6 days ago, they tried to kill me so they could steal my inheritance and pass him off as their heir." That's impossible." I pulled out Danny's photos and the documents I'd copied from Michael's study. Page by page, I laid the truth in front of her. Her disbelief slowly gave way to horror. "The girl's name was Sarah Miller," I said softly. 17. No family. They told her she was helping a loving couple. She died during delivery. Under suspicious circumstances. Carol's eyes filled with tears as she looked at the baby differently now. "He's an orphan." "Yes." "And if Michael and Emily get away with this, he'll grow up believing their lies, never knowing his real mother gave her life for him." "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "Document everything," I told her. "Take pictures, write down what they say, what they do. And help me make sure this child grows up knowing the truth about where he came from." She wiped her eyes and nodded. "His real name should be Charles Sarah Whitman. After his grandfather and his mother." "That's perfect," I whispered. I spent an hour with Carol and little Charles Sarah, taking photos, noting every detail, explaining what came next. She agreed to keep caring for him while secretly gathering evidence. "They'll be back around noon," she warned me as I left. "They always come home for lunch. To check on him. To make calls." "Perfect," I said. "By then, they'll have received my first message." Because while I'd been with Carol, Danny had been downtown, staked out across from Miranda's office with a telephoto lens. He caught Michael and Emily on camera shaking hands with Miranda, smug over what they thought was my official death certificate. But the real gift was already waiting inside. Jack had delivered it to Miranda's office, a handwritten note on elegant stationery. "Dear Michael and Emily, reports of my death have been greatly exaggerated. We need to talk. Love, Mom. P.S. Give my regards to little Charles Sarah. He's beautiful." It arrived at exactly 11:47 a.m. Danny watched from across the street as the messenger handed it over. Minutes later, all 3 of them came running out of the building, pale as ghosts. The psychological war had begun. That afternoon, when they returned home expecting to find their conspiracy intact, I was waiting for them. Sitting in my favorite armchair, the one Charles had given me for our 20th anniversary, I positioned myself where I'd be the first thing they saw. The look on their faces was worth every minute I'd spent in the Atlantic. "Hello, darlings," I said pleasantly. "How was your meeting? I hope you didn't sign anything too important while I was away." Emily screamed, an honest-to-God scream like she'd seen a demon. Michael froze, keys still in hand, his mouth open like maybe if he blinked, I'd vanish. "Surprised?" I asked. I must say, the reports of my death were greatly exaggerated. Though I did enjoy reading my own obituary. "Alzheimer's donations? Nice touch." Carol stepped in from the kitchen, baby in her arms. "Mrs. Whitman asked me to bring him out," she said nervously. "She wanted to meet her grandson properly." Her grandson?" Emily stammered. "Carol, this woman is dead." I offered sweetly. Yes, we've covered that. Turns out drowning isn't as easy as you thought, especially when there are good people willing to pull me out. Michael finally found his voice. Mom, we thought. The Coast Guard searched. The Coast Guard searched for debris, I snapped. Not survivors. Funny how that works when no one actually reports a person overboard. I reached for the baby, cradling him close. Hello, little Charles Sarah. I'm your real grandmother. Not the kind who tries to buy you with blood money. His name isn't that, Emily hissed, some of her poise returning. He's our son. We'll decide what to name him. Is he? I asked, looking into the baby's steady brown eyes. Then I turned my gaze back to her. Tell me, Emily, when exactly did you give birth? Because 4 days ago, on that yacht, you didn't look like a woman who delivered a baby 3 weeks earlier. I had a private birth, she stammered. Yes. So private the actual mother died, I shot back. Her name was Sarah Miller. 17. No family to ask questions. The silence was heavy. Carol gasped. Michael's voice wavered. That's impossible. We would never. Never what? I cut him off. Never conspire with Miranda Parker to run an illegal surrogacy ring? Never poison your own mother's reputation so you could steal her fortune? Never shove me off a yacht and leave me to drown. I rose slowly, still holding the baby. Which part exactly would you never do, Michael? Emily's eyes hardened. Her shock melted into calculation. Prove it, she spat. Say whatever you want. But proving it is another matter. I smiled for the first time since they walked in. Oh, sweetheart, I said softly. You really shouldn't have said that. Carol, would you mind taking Charles Sarah to his room for a nap? I asked, eyes locked on Michael and Emily. The grown-ups need to talk. When Carol disappeared down the hall with the baby, I walked to the mantel where Michael had arranged family photos, none with me in them. I took it in, then turned. Sit, I said, letting the old house manager tone slip back into my voice. Both of you. They sat, still stunned. Let me tell you how I've spent the last week, while you were planning my funeral and slicing up my estate. I pulled a manila folder from behind the chair cushion. I've been investigating, learning, documenting. I fanned Danny's photos across the coffee table. Michael and Emily meeting Miranda Parker, multiple visits to Whitmore Reproductive Services, bank records showing cash for a baby. This is Miranda Parker, I said, tapping a photo. She accelerates inheritances through what she calls compassionate intervention. In plain English, she helps greedy relatives kill elderly people for money. That's ridiculous, Emily snapped, yet her eyes were glued to the pictures, panic creeping in. Is it? Because I've got documentation on at least 6 other families where Parker provided legal cover. Convenient accidents right after carefully staged cognitive decline that later turned out to be chemically induced. I slid out more notes. Mrs. Elaine Walsh, 73, fell down her own stairs 3 weeks after her son started slipping sedatives into her evening tea. He inherited $2 million. Michael had gone chalk white. Mom, you're scaring yourself with conspiracy theories. Mr. Raymond Bennett, 68, single car crash after his daughter got his medication adjusted. She inherited 4. I looked straight at him. These aren't theories, son. These are murders. And you climbed into the same machine. We never killed anyone, Emily blurted. Even if what you're saying about this Parker woman is true, we never actually hurt anyone. Really? What about Sarah Miller? Silence. The 17-year-old whose baby you bought. The girl who had died during delivery, just in time to give you an heir and a narrative. We didn't know, Michael started and stopped. Didn't know Parker was running a black market surrogacy pipeline using vulnerable girls? Didn't know those girls keep dying during birth? Didn't know that makes you accessories? I laid down another sheet. Sarah's death certificate. Danny had pulled through a contact. Cause, unexpected cardiac arrest during delivery. But the nurse says Sarah was healthy, steady, no distress until moments after a routine medication, personally administered by Miranda Parker. Carol had drifted back to the doorway, listening, stricken. My investigator? Michael asked weakly. Oh yes, I said. You didn't think I was doing this alone, did you? I have a PI, surveillance, financials, medicals, and testimony. And, I added, walking to Charles's old desk, pulling out a small digital recorder, I have this. I've recorded our entire conversation. Every word. Every admission. Every detail you've just confirmed. I lifted the device. And in this state, only one party has to consent to a recording. Since we're in what used to be my home, I'm that party. Emily shot to her feet. You can't use that. It's, I don't know, entrapment or something. Actually, it's evidence, I said evenly. Evidence of conspiracy, fraud, and accessory to murder. The kind that keeps you locked up a very, very long time. Michael swallowed. What do you want? What do I want? I laughed, and it wasn't pretty. I want my money back. I want this baby placed with a family who will love him and tell him the truth about his mother. I want Miranda Parker arrested for the serial predator she is. And I want you both to remember, every day, that you tried to murder your own mother for cash. And if we cooperate? Emily asked. If you cooperate, I might choose not to press attempted murder charges. The fraud, the conspiracy, the accessory counts, those are already beyond me. But attempted murder is my call. I stared at the two people who had eaten at my table, opened my Christmas presents, and planned my death like a weekend trip. You have 24 hours. They chose wrong. Instead of confessing, they doubled down. I learned that at 6 the next morning when Danny Crawford called Mrs. Ramirez's B&B with an urgent warning. They're moving fast, he said. I've been monitoring comms. They spent all night on with Parker and someone else, a guy they keep calling the cleaner. My blood ran cold. What kind of cleaner? The kind who makes problems disappear. Permanently. They're planning to have you killed again, and this time they want the body found so there's no question you're dead. Mrs. Ramirez, listening from the kitchen doorway, started dialing before I could answer. 15 minutes later, Jack Reynolds screeched up in his pickup, and we were evacuating to a safe house Danny arranged. How long do we have? I asked as we sped through the pre-dawn dark. Not long. The cleaner's flying in from New York this morning. He specializes in staged accidents. Perfect record. The safe house was a small cottage on a private island, reachable only by boat. Jack knew the owner, a fisherman who owed him favors and never asked questions. We made land just as the sun bled over the Atlantic. This is insane, I said at the kitchen table, coffee shaking in my hand. My own son hired a professional killer. People do terrible things for money, Jack said, grim. But we're not letting them win. Danny arrived an hour later, face set. It's worse than we thought. Parker isn't just freelancing. She's a node in a network that's been targeting wealthy seniors across New England for years. He spread files and photos over the table. I count at least 20 suspicious deaths in 5 years. All rich. All with grasping relatives. All ruled accidental or natural when they should have triggered investigations. How are they getting away with it? I asked. They've planted people in the system, medical examiners, detectives, probate judges. This is organized crime with a very specific target demographic. Mrs. Ramirez, who insisted on coming despite the danger, leaned over a surveillance shot. This woman, she said, tapping the image. I've seen her. At the hospital where I volunteer. 6 months ago. She was asking about elderly patients without visitors. Said she worked for a social services agency. Danny and I traded a look. She was scouting, he said. And now they're coming for you, Jack added, because you're the first to survive and speak. Then we make sure I'm heard, I said. I spent the rest of the morning writing everything down. I wrote down everything, every detail of Michael and Emily's betrayal, every date, every dollar, every name tied to Miranda Parker's operation. If something happened to me, at least the truth would live on. Around noon, Danny's phone rang, and the news flipped the board. They found the cleaner, he said after hanging up. Dead in his hotel room. Single shot to the head. Professional hit. What does that mean? It means Parker's cleaning house. Anyone who can connect her to the network is a risk, including your son and daughter-in-law. The idea of Michael being murdered should have terrified me. Instead, a cold, sharp satisfaction surprised me. Good, I said. Let them learn what betrayal feels like. Jack shook his head. You're not hearing me, Margaret. If Parker's burning witnesses, that includes you, and it includes the baby. An orphaned infant with no legal guardians? That's a loose end she can't risk. My blood iced over. Charles, Sarah. She'll kill him too. Call it a tragic accident. A gas leak. A house fire. One incident that erases the evidence and the witness. I stood so fast my coffee went flying. We have to get him. It's too dangerous, Danny warned. They're watching your old house. Then I'll give them what they're waiting for. The plan was brutally simple, which made it terrifying. I'd walk right back into the trap, let Michael and Emily think they'd won, and trust Danny and Jack to be in position to pull me, and the baby, out when Parker arrived to finish the job. This is the dumbest plan I've ever heard, Mrs. Ramirez said as we readied the boat. It's the only way to save that baby, I told her, checking the tiny recorders Danny had handed me, and to get enough on Parker to bring down the whole machine. Danny had been monitoring chatter all morning. Parker was driving up from New York, planning to reach my former house by evening. Michael and Emily had been told to keep me alive until she could question me, then arrange my final accident. They think I'll bargain my life for the baby, I told Jack as we nosed toward the Newport dock. They have no idea I've been seeding this house for days. While Michael and Emily were busy taking orders, Carol had planted recorders throughout the house and tucked small cameras into clean sight lines. She would wait in the basement with little Charles Sarah, ready to slip out the old servant's entrance with him if things went south. You sure? Jack asked as we tied up. I'm sure of this, I said. If I don't do it, an innocent child dies because my son is greedy. I can't live with that. At exactly 6 p.m., I rang my old bell. Michael opened the door, haggard and scared. Mom, he breathed, and just for a heartbeat, I heard my little boy again. Hello, Michael. I'm here, as promised. Emily paced the living room, composure shot to pieces. She'll be here soon, she muttered. Parker. She wants to talk to you. I'm sure she does. Mom. Michael started, then stalled. You let it go this far, I said softly. Because $3 billion meant more to you than your mother's life. He couldn't meet my eyes. Parker arrived right at 7, smaller than I expected, neat, professional, the kind of woman who disappears into boardrooms and blends into funerals. Mrs. Whitman, she said pleasantly, offering a handshake like we were at a cocktail party. So glad you survived your boating mishap. We have a great deal to discuss. I'm sure we do. She sat across from me in what used to be my living room, opened a leather portfolio, and spoke like we were negotiating terms. You've caused trouble for my clients, she said. Michael and Emily followed instructions precisely, and yet you're alive, and alarmingly informed about matters that don't concern you. Murder concerns me, I said, especially when it's mine. I prefer estate planning acceleration, she replied smoothly. We help families access inheritances that would otherwise be trapped in years of probate. And for the elderly people you kill? I asked. What service do you provide them? Peace, she said. An end to fear and confusion. A dignified exit so their families can remember them as they were. I stared. The way she rationalized mass murder stole my breath. How many? How many what? How many people have you killed? She consulted her portfolio, as if checking a calendar. Over the past 5 years, my clients and I have successfully resolved 37 cases where continued existence created financial and emotional hardship. 37 murders, counted like tax returns. And I'm number 38? Oh, Mrs. Whitman, she smiled thinly. You'll be number 39. We had to resolve another matter earlier today, a gentleman who was getting curious. But yes, you'll need a more permanent accident this time. And the baby? Tragic carbon monoxide leak. These old houses, the heating can be so dangerous. I looked at Michael and Emily, frozen on the sofa like department store mannequins. This is what you wanted? Not just my death, his too. They said nothing. The infant is a loose end, Parker went on. He complicates the inheritance chain and raises questions about origin. Simpler to eliminate him now, than present Michael and Emily as tragically childless, and in need of support only significant wealth can provide. That's when I finally smiled. "Miss Parker," I said lightly, "there's something you should know." "And what's that?" "You're under arrest." The FBI came through every entrance at once, front, back, basement, even the windows, filling the house with shouted commands and the clatter of boots. They'd been listening to every word, recording Parker's confession to 37 murders and her plan to commit 2 more. "Miranda Parker," said Agent Natalie Brooks, voice firm, "you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, wire fraud, elder abuse, and racketeering." Parker bolted for the kitchen. She made it 6 feet before 3 agents drove her to the hardwood. Michael and Emily sat stunned while agents read them their rights. "Mrs. Whitman," Agent Brooks said, turning to me with a tight smile, "that was incredibly dangerous, and incredibly well executed." Turned out, Danny wasn't just a PI. He was a former FBI agent working undercover on the elder abuse ring Parker had built. My case gave them the perfect stage to capture her confession on federal audio. "We've tracked her 2 years, Agent Brooks explained as techs swarmed the rooms. "She never got her hands dirty, always intermediaries, always plausible deniability. Until tonight." "Until tonight," I said, "when she confessed to 37 murders while planning 2 more, on tape." Carol came up from the basement with little Charles Sarah, both safe. "Is it over?" she asked. "It's over," I said, taking the baby. "At least the dangerous part. The legal part took months." Michael and Emily were charged with conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, elder abuse, and accessory to murder in Sarah Miller's death. They took pleas, 25 for Michael, 20 for Emily. Parker went to trial, convicted on all counts, life without parole. Her network unraveled over the next year. 17 co-conspirators, crooked medical examiners, probate lawyers, and grasping relatives, were arrested. Investigators traced more than $200 million stolen from elderly victims across 6 states. But the most important outcome was the baby. I adopted Charles Sarah Whitman with full court support, and with Sarah's extended family, found living in Vermont, blessing the decision. They were grateful someone would raise her son and tell him the truth about his brave, young mother. "His full name is Charles Sarah Whitman," I told the family court judge. "Charles for his grandfather. Sarah for his mother. Whitman because that's the family that will love him and tell him the truth." The judge, a woman in her 60s who'd followed the case closely, smiled. "I think Sarah Miller would be proud of how her story ends." I'm 72 now, 5 years later, and Charles Sarah is a remarkable kid who knows exactly who he is. He knows his mom was a brave teenager named Sarah who wanted him to have a good life. He knows his adoptive father and stepmother tried to use him in a scheme that cost Sarah her life. He knows, too, that the people who are supposed to love you most can be the ones you have to guard against. Mrs. Ramirez still runs her B&B, now with a side gig consulting for seniors who suspect their families might not have their best interests at heart. Jack Reynolds still charters his fishing boat, and he's something of a legend for pulling a drowning grandmother out of the Atlantic. Agent Danny Crawford still works cases and sends me Christmas cards with photos of elderly folks who got to keep their lives and their dignity. As for Michael and Emily, they're still in prison. Michael writes letters sometimes, asking forgiveness, blaming people smarter than he is. I don't write back. Here's what I learned during my week as a dead woman. Family isn't blood, obligation, or inheritance. It's who shows up when you need them. It's protecting the vulnerable. It's choosing love over greed, every single day. Charles, Sarah, and I have that kind of family now. No one gets pushed off boats. No one raids trust funds. And no one has to die so someone else can get rich. It's a better family than the one I was born into, and far better than the one I raised. Thanks for listening. If you've lived something like this, share your story. I'm listening.